Welcome back. The complexity of the Earth's climate has made it difficult to prove that a dying coral reef in the South Pacific could possibly be caused by burning fossil fuels in the Northern Hemisphere. The latest report from the United Nations on climate change leaves little doubt who's to blame.
Penina Motte has lived on the remote Pacific island of Kabara all her life. She's noticed big changes in the climate. Vital supplies of fish and rainwater are getting scarcer, and she fears for the future of the island's 400 inhabitants.
The way I see things now, if the weather pattern continues, clouds forming and no rain or very little rain, in 5 years' time we will have a much bigger problem than we do now. I don't know what the future holds for our children and grandchildren. They are the ones who will bear the consequences.
Islanders have a wealth of anecdotal evidence about climate change and its impacts, which scientists are now finding invaluable. One such scientist is Randy Thaman, an American who's lived and worked in Fiji for over 30 years. He's spent his professional life studying Pacific Islands, but this is the first time he's traveled to Kabara.
People like Penina and other people at the village level are the people we should really listen to, because they're the people who have had to live with these adverse changes. They've been passing down stories about tidal waves, about storms, about droughts, about the condition of the reef, about the kinds of fish that used to be there and are no longer there.
Randy's keen to hear from Penina about changes to Kabara's coastline, in particular the impact of warmer temperatures on the coral reef.
So, Penina, are the corals beginning to die now?
They are dying in big numbers.
In the lagoon?
Yes, in the lagoon.
And over here you're seeing dying coral as well?
Yes, little by little. When the tide goes out, the corals are exposed.
So not many fish can feed here?
Yes, very few.
All of this creates very, very serious problems for local communities. As the temperature goes up and you begin to get your reefs dying, naturally you're going to lose all of the different invertebrate and fish species and other vertebrate species that depend upon these reefs.
Damaged coral is bad news for another reason too, because the reef, along with shoreline trees, can also help protect islanders from the salt water that surrounds them.
We're losing coastlines, reefs are dying, trees are falling into the ocean, and it's much easier for salt water and salt spray to ruin inland gardens. You get what they call saltwater incursion, where the waves, because they're a little bit higher, they actually are moving in, polluting the fresh water table, and once that's polluted, a lot of plants that aren't adapted to the coastal area begin to die or stop their production or don't set fruit. And so it basically seems to be a combination of a whole range of events that have increased appreciably, very clearly in the last 10 to 20, 30 years.
It isn't just Penina's village, Undu, that's facing problems. She and Randy are on their way to meet Tima, who lives along the coast in Naklayanga village.
You can notice the difficulty we are facing here in Naklayanga. Look at the abandoned houses. These were government quarters from the 70s and 80s, where nurses and doctors lived. They were destroyed by tidal waves. Where we are standing now, there were trees growing. In 2002, our village was damaged by the cyclone, destroying the trees and plants. It's all just sand here. You'll see that we are just planting trees again, and we believe it will protect the beach, hold the sand so it doesn't get washed away.
Well,
this is very, very consistent with what we heard in Vundu, that starting about 30 years ago, you began to get much, much higher high tides, much higher storm surges, much more frequent storm surges. And in this case, it came up here and it made it almost impossible, or at least the people were not willing to live in this area any longer.
The islanders may not be able to control the natural elements, but there are things they can do to minimize damage.
There are a number of adaptations that local communities can do to address this. One of them being not locate their houses right near the high tide line or close to the high tide line, to protect and to replant coastal trees that are adapted to salt spray, high waves, and can withstand these events and protect the inland areas, to maybe build up walls and plant ground cover, or at least protect the local vegetation. I think protection is probably much easier than replanting, because to reproduce mangroves, coastal forests that God and nature have produced is very difficult.
But just how bad is the damage to Kabara's coral reef? Randy Thaman does some underwater investigation.
The reef here, probably about 90% dead. Very little living coral, very, very few large fish. The widespread death of coral reefs is something that we've never experienced before. It's certainly, a lot of the evidence points to the fact that it's global warming, and there are probably other factors put together that are just killing our coral reefs. But the thing that's most worrying is, even on outer islands like this, where there are not large populations and pollution from hotels, the reefs are still dying.
The people of Kabara make a negligible contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions which cause global warming. And yet, ironically, their very existence is threatened by its impacts. Now Randy Thaman has spent some time here, what are his conclusions?
People here are extremely resourceful. They're trying to deal with this, but they're having a hard time dealing with it because no one in living memory has ever experienced these kinds of changes. The evidence from small islands strongly supports the evidence from the Alps, the evidence from Greenland, the evidence in many, many areas, the evidence from New Orleans. It all fits into a single picture. And if we're not willing to put that puzzle together and realize what it is, that there is climate change, that the main contributing factor is probably human pollution, human intervention, and that unless we change the ways we live, then it's going to worsen in the future, and that there's not going to be much future for our children, the children on islands, but also the children in developed countries are also going to suffer.
On Sundays, Undu village is called to church, Kabaran style.
When there are rainwater problems on the island, we get together and ask the pastor to conduct a special service and ask our God for rain to fall. It's a tradition our ancestors started a long time ago. Church is important and useful to us, the Kabara community, because it brings us together, because it broadens our outlook. It's also important because it encourages us to treasure the natural resources God has given us. It is the same with the rain. It reminds us that God gives us rain.
But maybe the villagers' prayers have been answered, for the time being, at any rate.
I am really excited about the rain. Clouds getting heavy. I hope it falls heavily so that the tanks fill up and we have water for washing, cooking and bathing. I'm really happy to see clouds forming.
But the clouds today, like so many days before, did not bring a rainstorm. Instead, there was just a trickle of badly needed rain. Despite this, and the hardships of life on Kabara, Penina is optimistic about what seems to others a precarious future for the island.
I strongly believe a time will come when people change their way of thinking to address the problems we are facing. Bigger countries and global leaders will look out for smaller countries, because we are all God's children in this world. And if they can stop and think about what they are manufacturing, which causes us so many problems, then there may be a future.
A tiny island in the South Pacific might be a long way from where you live, but climate change is affecting all of us. That's it for now, but do join me next time for another edition of Witness.